Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the mental health and personality factors that may be at work in the JonBenet Ramsey case. This 1996 murder case became popular because of the odd circumstances surrounding the death of a 6-year-old beauty pageant participant, JonBenet Ramsey, including a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note. Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. First, I'll take a look at the crime, and then I'll examine the mental health and personality factors, including looking at the evidence that points toward the guilt and innocence of different people that may be involved in this murder. So starting with the crime. This takes us to December 26, 1996 in Boulder, Colorado. Patricia Ramsey, also known as Patsy, calls 911 at 5:52 a.m. to report that she has found a ransom note and her daughter, JonBenet Ramsey, is missing. Patricia also called family and friends, informing them that JonBenet Ramsey was missing. The ransom note specifically cautioned against contacting anyone. The police arrived 3 minutes after the 911 call. The 3 people in the home were Patsy, her husband John, and their 9-year-old son, Burke. The ransom note was written to John Ramsey, and it specified that the kidnappers would be calling between 8 and 10 a.m. in pursuit of their demand, $118,000. That call never came. The police cordoned off JonBenet Ramsey's bedroom, but they did not search the house. It wasn't until over 7 hours later that the police would ask John Ramsey and one of his neighbors that came over to search the house and look for anything that was out of place. John Ramsey went directly to the basement and came up from the basement carrying JonBenet, saying that he found her behind a latched door going to a room that was rarely used. JonBenet's body was covered with a white blanket. There was a cord wrapped around her wrists and her neck, and it appeared that she had been strangled with a garrote. There was duct tape over her mouth, which John removed before coming up the steps. Then he covered her body with a throw blanket. John Ramsey had been instructed prior to this to leave everything where it was, right? Not to disturb anything. At this point, the crime scene was contaminated. Now moving to January 1997, we see at this point it was determined that JonBenet died from a skull fracture and strangulation. In April of 97, we see the police interview John and Patsy. In December of 1997, the police indicate that they are highly suspicious of the couple. January 1998, the couple refuses to be interviewed by the police a second time. So we see kind of a foolish mistake here by the police. They let their suspicions about the couple be known. So it kind of makes sense that the couple would not want to cooperate from this point on. The police looked at a number of suspects, not only the people in the home, but they also looked at neighbors and other people they thought may have committed similar crimes. Moving to October 1999, we see that the district attorney announces that there will be no indictments in this case. This takes us all the way to June 2006. Patsy dies of ovarian cancer. In August 2006, a former schoolteacher named John Mark Carr is arrested after confessing to the crime. He was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing, so it appears like he was just looking for fame. 2008, we see John, Patsy, and Burke are exonerated based on the results of testing for touch DNA. Many people have disagreed with this exoneration. October 2010, the police conduct a new round of interviews. Then in January 2013, we see a report indicating that a 1999 grand jury had voted to indict John and Patsy in connection with the death of JonBenet. But the DA believed that there was not enough evidence and they would not sign the indictment. As of the time I'm making this video, this case is still unsolved. So now moving to this question, who is responsible, and looking at the mental health and personality factors. So I don't know who did this. This is really just all speculation. Like I always say, I'm just speculating about a situation like this. I'll take a look at the evidence that points toward the idea that somebody in the house committed the crime, and then I'll look at the evidence that points against that. So that would point toward an intruder. So pointing toward the people in the house, evidence of a break-in was restricted to just one area. There's a broken window in the basement. There's a hard suitcase that was pushed flush against that same wall, and there's a scuff mark on that wall. In the opening, there was an undisturbed spider web, although John said that he broke that window months before after he locked himself out of the house, right? So by what he's saying, that broken window was not tied to the crime. We also see this unusual ransom note. It came from one of Patsy's notepads and was written with a Sharpie similar to one that Patsy owned. We see the $118,000 referenced in that note was almost identical to the amount that John had recently received as a bonus. There are also apparent references to Dirty Harry and the movie Speed, and there were movie posters in the house. So it makes it look like the people in the house like movies, and then they use those references. This is really one of the most fascinating pieces of evidence, and one of the few items in this case that really gives us any type of look into possible mental health and personality factors. Now, it's possible this was a legitimate ransom note, but that seems unlikely. There are several important aspects of this note. I'm going to go through many of these in detail. So first here, why on earth would somebody write a note this long as they're in the commission of a crime? Because it came from Patsy's notepad. It's theorized that whoever wrote it did not write it in advance. If there really was a kidnapper, they certainly would have brought the note with them. The timing doesn't make sense either with this note. We're to believe that the alleged kidnapper wrote the note prior to attempting the crime. We know that JonBenet was eventually killed. The intruder certainly didn't write the letter afterward. That wouldn't have made any sense. The fact that it was handwritten in the moment also makes me wonder how that person stayed so calm. Like their hands should have been shaking. Of course, this would be the case whether this was a family member or an intruder. Whoever wrote the note would have had to stay calm long enough to complete it. If the motive really was to kidnap JonBenet, why did the kidnapper leave the body behind? That way the Ramseys wouldn't have known if JonBenet was dead or not. Therefore, they would have still paid the ransom. Why was the note addressed to Mr. Ramsey? This is a little formal for a ransom note. We see they reference a small foreign faction. I found this to be peculiar. Why would they use the word small? Someone representing a small foreign faction would not want to draw attention to the fact that it was not large. It's just not the way one refers to a small foreign faction. It's like whoever wrote this really didn't understand small foreign factions at all. How did the writer know about John Ramsey's bonus? Right? Only a few people would have had this information. There's a lot of unnecessary language in the letter. It has kind of an artistic feel to it. For example, it says, "We have your daughter in our possession." Kind of legal sounding. It also says, "If we monitor you getting the money early." Monitor? Seems like a strange choice of words. The ransom note talks about deviating from instructions. It warns that you will be denied her remains for proper burial. For most people contemplating paying a ransom, would this be a deal breaker? Would they think to themselves, I would really like her back, but I don't want to spend the money. And then they read the note a little further and they see the part about not getting the body back and they say, oh, that does it. I'm convinced. Let's pay the ransom. I think if somebody's engaging in a kidnapping, they would know that the victim's safe return is the key item that they are selling. There's no need to try to create an additional incentive for somebody to follow the instructions. They're already properly incentivized. The note also seems to give a lot of advice. Make sure you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. As I was reading this, I was expecting the writer to say, don't forget to grab your comfortable shoes, brush your teeth before you leave the house, and please don't forget your seatbelt. The letter demonstrates an unusual degree of concern for the details of the Ramseys' experience as they try to deliver the ransom. Like paying the ransom really isn't good enough. They want the Ramseys to have a good customer experience. They want them to be satisfied with everything that happened. Like we would expect that after the victim was returned, there's a customer survey that comes along with it, right? Rate 1 to 5. How did you like this kidnapping? It's just not something that a kidnapper would do. They're not concerned with the feelings of any of the victims. The entire letter is just disconnected from the brutality of kidnapping and, of course, disconnected from the brutality of the murder that actually occurred. It demonstrates far too much sensitivity for the Ramseys' point of view. I think this ransom note is one of the best indications pointing toward the involvement of the Ramseys. I know there have been all these handwriting experts that say that Patsy didn't write the letter, but it really seems unlikely that anyone else did write the letter. I have a real difficulty believing the intruder would have written this. Now, of course, it's possible that John wrote it, but again, I think Patsy would be the more obvious suspect in this case. So that covers the ransom notes. Now moving along with the evidence. we see Patsy's paintbrush was used as the murder weapon, right? So we have the paper written in the note, potentially the Sharpie used to write the note, and now the paintbrush used as a garrote. A flashlight or a baseball bat may have been the murder weapon. We see that the couple denies owning a flashlight that was found on the scene. This seems unusual, like they're trying to keep a distance from anything that could implicate them, even something that would not have prompted suspicion. So many people own a flashlight. Again, it's like they're pushing every possible connection away. There's this inaudible portion of Patsy's 911 call. It does make it seem like something's being covered up, right? There's just parts where you can't hear it, and it makes people wonder what was being discussed. There are many disagreements about what was being said in that portion. John and Patsy called family and friends immediately after calling the police. This makes no sense, as if they were trying to deliberately contaminate the crime scene. John Ramsey failed to follow the police instructions and did in fact contaminate the crime scene. We see the 2 hours from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. passed, and there was no call from the kidnapper. When that time passed, neither John nor Patsy said anything, like they didn't expect there to be a call in the first place. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Burke's interview on Phil McGraw. People have suggested because he was smiling during that interview, he must have had something to do with the crime. But the smiling part could have just been anxiety. It's an uncomfortable topic. All those cameras are pointed at him. That interview really could be scary, right? So I don't really think that interview points toward guilt for Burke. Now pointing against guilt for the people in the house. We see an absence of a motive for John and Patsy Ramsey, and of course an absence of motive in the case of Burke. They had no reason to commit the crime. We see this footprint found outside the house. There's a lot of disagreement about that. I guess technically this points toward an intruder, but anybody could have made that footprint. A few windows in the house were open just a little. It was Christmas time, and they were running electrical cords outside for the lights. So there is technically an alternative here other than that broken window in the basement. Someone could have approached one of those windows that were cracked open, opened it the rest of the way, climbed in, committed the murder, and then left, and then closed it on the way out. It's not really likely, but again, technically possible. We see these 2 marks that were found on JonBenet's body that seem to be consistent with a stun gun. There's no indication that the Ramseys owned one of those, but others disagree that a stun gun would make those marks, so it may have been something else that caused those marks. And then finally, looking at the evidence against guilt for the Ramseys, we see that DNA was found on JonBenet's body, and that DNA did not belong to anybody in the house. And of course, this was the key piece of evidence that led to their exoneration. So now weighing the evidence, what are my thoughts in this case? Well, I have selected 5 possible explanations to review. I will start with the most unlikely explanation for the crime and then move to the most likely. It's important to keep in mind that I'm not sure about any of these. This is all just my opinion, including the one that I think has the highest probability of being true. So starting with the least likely explanation. Burke, again 9 years old at the time, accidentally strikes JonBenet with some sort of blunt object, not intending to kill her, and the Ramseys cover up the crime. I have several problems with this theory. There are very few 9-year-olds that would commit murder. If Burke did do it, it would be surprising that he could have tolerated the police interrogations and not revealed anything to implicate himself. Another problem here is that at 9 years old, he wouldn't have been charged as an adult, and nobody would have believed that this was intentional homicide, so there would be no reason to cover it up. Moving to the next explanation, this is the intruder theory. This explanation just doesn't make a lot of sense. Somebody breaks into the house, they spend 10 to 15 minutes writing a note, they leave no fingerprints on it, only Patsy's fingerprints were found on the note. Then they kill the victim anyway and don't take the body with them, guaranteeing that there will be no ransom. At the same time, if somebody were irrational enough to commit this crime, it does stand to reason that their behavior across multiple domains would be disorganized as well. So that kind of lends some credibility to this theory. Moving to the next explanation. John and Patsy conspired to commit premeditated murder. So the problem here is really the absence of a motive, although it does explain how they were able to keep their story straight and why they retained counsel early. Now, I think it was a good idea in their position to have an attorney, but most people would not do that. Moving to the next explanation, Patsy commits the crime in the heat of the moment, then John covers for her. This could be what happened, but we have the same problem with the motive. What would have caused Patsy to get so stressed or angry that she would have committed murder? We see this theory that she was frustrated with bedwetting, but it's really not a strong motive. Then the last explanation would be that John committed the crime in the heat of the moment, and Patsy covered for him. The only reason I put this one as slightly more probable than the last one was because John appeared to be eager to contaminate the crime scene. If Patsy had committed the murder, I would think that she would be the one who would want to contaminate the scene with her DNA, hair, clothing fibers, and whatever else was on her person. Even still, this theory really has the same problems as the previous theory. So putting it all together, like so many unsolved crimes, this case starts with an unlikely event. The fact that JonBenet was murdered at all is unusual, so every explanation is going to seem unlikely as well, although there has to be some explanation somewhere for this crime. Just looking at the statistics, an explanation involving John and/or Patsy in some way would be the most likely. They had access, Patsy's property was used in the commission of the crime, and the person who wrote the note knew about John's bonus. I certainly believe that there is reasonable doubt in this case, so if the two had been charged with murder, then I think they would have been not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But when it comes down to actual innocence or guilt, I think guilt appears more probable than innocence in this case. There's just this sense that they knew more than they were revealing. I know whenever I talk about controversial cases, there will be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.